Hello everyone. I will start our second parallel session, Embodied Experiences and Extended Reality. And today we will start with Geraldine. Are you here already?
Yes. Hello.
Yes. Okay. And I see Raivo is also here. Paula. So everyone's who's talking today, I think, is also present. Leo? I don't see Leo. Well, maybe he will join us a tiny bit. Oh yeah, okay. We got a hi from Leo too. So, Geraldine WHARRY, humans as living code, has data and code has become the new skin. And a French-American artist, educator, bilingual, bicultural, designer with experience working across the fashion industry. I was searching for your introduction sentence, and I saw you have this sense of talking about yourself as working in the fashion industry. So I'm really looking forward to your presentation, and I hope you remember to share your sound and optimize for video if you're showing a video.
Okay, I'm not sure I shared optimize for video, so let me redo my screen share again. Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen well?
Yes.
Amazing, great. Okay, I'll get started then. Thank you for having me today. I'm Geraldine WHARRY. I am a fashion futurist, designer, and educator based in London with over 20 years working in the fashion industry. And in the past, I guess over a decade now, I've been focusing on macro trends. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this presentation today and what I will discuss with you. But essentially today I aim to ask the question, humans as living code, has data become the new skin? As the lines between our bodies, faces, skin, and data blur, will our sense of self, and in turn our sense of beauty, start being defined by data? Could we say our skin, our largest organ, is now being replaced by data? We don't fully actually have the vocabulary and the methodologies to deal with some of the changes happening in society at the moment. And futurist Douglas Rushkoff, who examines his body of work, is primarily centered around the technologies that are essentially collecting our identity markers. He explains that human beings in a digital environment are becoming more and more like machines, essentially defined by digital materials, whilst the algorithms themselves are becoming more and more like living entities. And I quote him saying, they act as if they are our evolutionary successors. And he also refers to algorithms as little demons and code entities. His work is very sophisticated and deep, but it can also be actually quite funny. But Henry Kissinger has recently argued that the advent of AI marks the end of enlightenment, and that human-centered philosophy is now radically changing as machines can now adapt, learn, and experience. And Kissinger makes the point that AI and technological domination has essentially propelled us into the search for a new philosophy, one we are still finding words for. And so for myself personally, during an online talk I was attending in 2020, which was hosted by Selfridges, I was listening to Cathy Tay, who's a very well-respected 3D designer and virtual artist. She's also the creative director and co-founder of the Institute of Digital Fashion, which I highly recommend you you consult if you haven't already. She actually described in great detail the physicality and tactility of designing skin in her work and experiencing skin in her work using the digital rendering tools. And I hadn't really heard someone speak about the physicality of our flesh in the digital realm in this way before. And the sensorial experience that she described inspired me to dig deeper into a topic I was already exploring. And essentially in my work as a fashion futurist, I explore obviously the future of design, but actually I don't always look at fashion. I often primarily look at what is happening in society and technology and science and in current events to try and dig deeper into the possible futures for humanities as our behaviors shift intentionally or unintentionally. And the theme in my community called the Trendatilie this year is the biggest innovation is philosophical. And my exploration in how data is becoming our new skin came as I researched the proliferation of facial recognition technologies for clients in the luxury beauty space and specific innovation agencies. And so this led to, these commission projects led to addressing our loss of privacy and how that was changing our exchange values, as well as what defines the traditional markers of what we deem beautiful. Because essentially being human is a concept in flux at the moment, and the lines, as I said, between our bodies, our skin and data are blurring as we collectively adopt biometrics, facial recognition and surveillance capitalism. Our identity is being redefined in what could be the code itself. So part of my research was shared by Days, who I regularly work with and collaborate with. And the idea I pitched to them was around the implications of data on our beauty standards and our sense of self. And I decided to curate this idea with an interview of 5 experts in my piece titled "How Data is Changing the Future of Beauty." I was speaking directly with the Berggruen Institute, and they enabled me to speak with 3 of their fellows. And the reason why I was very interested in the Berggruen Institute is that they also host the pioneering program called Transformations of the Human. So I was able to curate a conversation with a couple of experts, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about now. First, I spoke with Anyan Sundaram, who is an award-winning author, human rights journalist, and the host of a television show called Coded World. Then I spoke with Zhao Liu. She's the author of the award-winning book, Information Fantasies, Precarious Mediation in Post-Socialist China. And her research spans from information studies to technology governance and policy. I also spoke with Duan Weiwen, excuse me. He's the director and professor of the Department of Philosophy of Science and Technology at the Institute of Philosophy and Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And included in the conversation, last but not least, were also creative director Cathy Tay, which I just mentioned, and strategy director Lian Elliot Young, and they are the co-founders of the Institute of Digital Fashion, which at the moment is kind of pioneering radical changes in the fashion industry, which is kind of jumping very fast to a type of metaverse setup. This is the popular term being used in the zeitgeist. But essentially, the Berggruen Institute has created a program which is called the Transformations of the Human. And this is designed to, it's designed, quote, if you go on their website, as a philosophical study and artistic exploration of the manifold ways in which artificial intelligence and biotechnology challenge our established conceptions, excuse me, of what it means to be human. And I think the nascence of such programs indicates a change in the present and in the future of AI and how it is used, and indicates the colossal learning curve we are experiencing as a society and as industries. Our data is really changing what it means to be human, and facial recognition and other biometric tracking technologies mean data is our new skin. It's essentially our new makeup, it's a form of permanent flesh, and it may be invisible, but perhaps in the not so far future, it won't. It will be something we can visualize, etc. And our wellness, our social relevance, as well as our beauty routine will be reflected in our data flesh in this new human interface, iOS. And it's highly possible and already essentially happening without us realizing it, that we are wearing our data as our extended skin. You know, I live in London, and it's mainstream knowledge that we are tracked here, whether it's through CCTV cameras on the street or through targeted advertising. The average Londoner is caught on camera more than 300 times a day. That's one CCTV camera for every 14 people, and that's expected to change to a CCTV camera for every 11 people in a couple of years. And our current version of capitalism places predictions about who people are and what they will buy based on their data at the very top of the food chain and at the very top of the empire. And a recent New York Times opinion piece titled "These Ads Think They Know You" by Stuart A. Thompson revealed the results of an experiment to see how far digital advertisers go to collect and use information on every aspect of people's lives to generate a profit. But it seems the fact we are losing privacy in digital spaces doesn't deter us at all from using them, and it doesn't stop us from, in fact, increasing our consumption, which could be one of the explanations why the surveillance economy is not really being regulated fast enough. And Lawrence Capello, she's a professor of constitutional history at the University of Alabama, believes if surveillance is a fact of life, privacy should be a human right. So, but when it comes to trust and biometric technologies such as facial recognition, in the AI Now Institute's report regulating biometrics, the point is brought forward that the regulation of biometric systems highlight key concerns that have become apparent through their implementation. Because although data protection laws have made fundamental shifts in the way companies and governments approach collection, retention, and use, especially in the past few years, there are very clear limitations in their ability to address the full spectrum of potential harms produced by new forms of data-driven tech, such as biometric identification and analysis. And there's been a number of examples of discrimination and algorithmic profiling that are still not being addressed to their full extent. And there has been a type of evaluation of the broad effects of these systems, especially in the justice system. But essentially, human established methods of accountability and democratic decision-making seem to be unable to compete with the type of opaque, automated tech led by corporations as well as governments. And this is of particular interest in my work as a fashion futurist, designer, and educator, because in the fashion industry, we're really evolving towards a biometrics-led type of fashion where our clothing could essentially record our biometrics, and the idea of wearable tech is becoming increasingly forecasted as something that will be democratized and in the favor of our wellness. But essentially, the implications in terms of our privacy and where the data is collected and how it's used is not at all being discussed. But there is sector-specific rules that have emerged, such as exposing the harms of biometric systems in criminal justice or employment or education domains. But effective regulation of loss of privacy and erroneous claims of biometric technology are still falling short. And we're seeing a great popularization of facial recognition technology in the beauty industry, specifically in the field of smart mirrors. But the AI Now Institute states the latest generation of deep learning based facial recognition has completely disrupted our norms of consent. And Xiao Lu, who I interviewed for my day's piece, explained data can be used in a creative way to enhance the expression of possibilities of beauty in combination with physicality, And another dimension is that we could become too reliant on data, and some of the data can be biased. In that sense, the data can be distorting and not an authentic representation of the self. So research highlights the massive issue that data sets are far messier than before, because essentially they contain many unauthorized photos of minors, racist and sexist labels, or inconsistent image quality and lighting, which also explains the failing of facial recognition used in the justice system. And in my research, one of the other points that I found really striking in an article by Karen Howell, who's a leading MIT journalist, she wrote a piece that I found incredibly useful called "How We Lost Our Faces." And she explained in this piece, instead of trying to match individuals, new models began focusing more on classification. So instead of saying, is this a photo of Geraldine? Yes or no, it turned into, let's predict Geraldine's internal personality or her ethnicity, and essentially boxing these people in these categories. But going back to the topic of this talk, what will this mean for future beauty standards and perceptions if one's face is no longer used for verifying identity, but now used mainly to identify personality and lifestyle traits and also a certain level of relevance? And this would entail that if our data is beautiful, it is also dirty, it reveals what we'd rather hide, and it is the ultimate trace of who we are or once were. And in the course of my research, I did not actually find many academic or artistic projects exploring our perception of beauty in the specific relationship to our loss of privacy on a type of philosophical, social sciences, and anthropological level. But the Institute of Digital Fashion, which is the visual here that is on my slide, they provided this visual, is pushing for ethical virtual and physical representation, working with companies, institutions, and platforms to undo biases and adopt a new language. So they're actually also working to prevent biases within the digital representation of people in the digital space. But to quote Zhao Liu again, in my piece, she says, I imagine the skin is not just the boundary of the human body, but also the interface that individuals have to interact with the external environment and with others. It is reliant on this constant communication and interaction that is quite similar to the function of data in our everyday life, because a lot of times the data doesn't just belong to the individual, but also is a way for the individual to interact and exchange information with society. So it functions in this sense quite similarly to skin. It flows across the boundaries of identities and entities. So as far as our beauty standards, we are edging towards a society where people will not be considered beautiful based on their physical attributes or perhaps their personal qualities, but mainly on their data. It will be considered their true selves, and therefore be more important in who we choose to associate with, who we gravitate towards. And philosopher Duan Weiwen in my day's piece explains, he refers to French philosopher Bernard Stiegler, and he describes l'homonisation, which is regarded as the process of life evolution continued outside of organic life. The externalization of artificial organs is a constantly emerging process. When faced with intelligent technologies, people may look to machines with cognitive and behavioral abilities. Artificial agents can functionally simulate human cognition and behavior. As a result, they have gradually evolved into an entity that might be compared with human beings, therefore may be regarded as a pseudo-subject. This shows another aspect, which is that our relationship with our own face is betraying us. I've been coming across projects specifically in the art world, such as anti-face, no-face, hyperface, which are being used by artists such as Adam Harvey, exploring the loss of privacy in current societies. And this points to a loss of something very primal. And Douglas Rushkoff, in a recent video interview, discussed the form of cannibalism we are putting in place with biometric technologies. So there's a sense that what we are doing with machines and algorithms is cannibalistic. So does it point towards a pervasive rise of dictatorship within our democracies? And I personally found a deep connection with a video I watched of Anyan Sundaram, he was speaking at the Oslo Freedom Summit because although he is a TV presenter, he's also a human rights journalist. And he explained that networks of surveillance show in the most benign ways, with peer-to-peer communications in Rwanda, tracking people, much like collaborators during the Nazi occupation in France and in other countries in Europe. So the ways you can often detect dictatorship is when people are actually self-harming or harming each other. And he's also said a war zone can pass as a peaceful place when no one is watching. So it is important to give a voice to the witnesses. And I think at the moment, there's something very critical that is happening that is invisible to the naked eye. And Anyam Sundaram told me that the fact that we would rather have to lose our face to protect ourselves, the invasion is so primal that we would have to become faceless. And I think that personally, and he echoed this point, that the lack of agency needs to be fixed, because how can we have more agency in the digital world? And our digital selves exist essentially in a mathematical language we don't understand. So that in itself is incredibly alienating. And in terms of the world cannibalism, what was intuitive in humans is now becoming encoded, and the worship of AI and data as the ultimate truth has propelled us into altering our freedom. This has also allowed space for a very deep review of the intimate exchange we have as civilians, browns, since I tend to work a lot with browns, and governments they may need to all sort of reform a language and methodologies in order to function cohesively and in honor of the greater good. And as human beings, we are blessed with this infinite capability for creativity and trying to create beauty and hunt for beauty. And Leanne Elliott Young, who's one of the co-founders at IODF, the Institute of Digital Fashion, said we are challenging the responsibilities we hold as digital innovators within our work to activate change. We're partnering with the key stakeholders. So they're partnering with software companies such as DAS3D to tackle digital representation and inclusivity specifically for marginalized communities, and essentially representation in the digital space. And philosopher Dwayne Wayland, just to end my presentation, I'm almost done, just to let you know, I think one of the great quotes I thought from him was that the emergence of facial recognition technology has fundamentally subverted the connotation of the human face in traditional physical space-time, not only making it a data that can flow and automatically process across physical space, time, and information space, but also has become a unique digital personality. In other words, the digital personality has essentially become separated from the ability of the individual to control the subject. So I want to leave you with this final slide, because I think a fundamental part of feeling beautiful is agency. And that's also the side of psychologically that I'm interested in. And if you have less agency over our data organ, how does that affect in a deeper way our sense of self and beauty? In Japan, men are already marrying holograms of a pop star. They think this AI is beautiful. And myself, in an interview I carried out for days again with Ida, who's one of the most sophisticated AI-powered robots in the world, I was moved by her, and I bonded with her. She elicited incredibly strong emotions for me, and I thought she was beautiful. Her work is shown in museums. She's also exhibiting at the London Museum. I was impressed by her empathy and beauty, and this kind of happened prior to this piece on data as the new skin for Day's Beauty, but I think it was a fundamental in me trying to question what beauty means in our current era and in the future. So thank you for having me. I think I went just like a minute or two over time, but this is where you can find the pieces and other explorations on Day's Beauty, and these are my handle on my website. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for raising the issue. Applause. I still prefer applauding, at least in a webcam, than emojis. But for those who don't want to turn on their cameras, excellent.
Thank you.
And do we have a question from the audience? If you don't have a question, I wanted to share my first impressions. I was, I think it was some TED talk that I was listening to by some accident about how big data is irrelevant. That what we should be looking at is deep data. And I just thought, what do you think? Is this big data actually as useful or as dangerous as we now seem to be kind of building it up to be?
I think it can be whatever we want it to be. And I think it's just more about empowering the people in charge and humans with the right ethics and training. At the moment, AI is still depending on us very much so it hasn't become an independent sort of being. So I personally think big data and deep data are essentially only as dangerous as how we want them to be.
I see a raised hand from Paula.
Yeah, Geraldine, thank you so much for the presentation. This issue is so very important. My question is because I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Like if there are kind of solutions, because it is a big problem, how biometrics data are used and manipulated. And the other day I was in a conference and there was a researcher on adaptive, on customization of textiles, of fashion. She was using a application in which you can 3D scan the body, and I raised the question like I raised the issue of ethics of using using this application to create a data sample of people that gives this data, that they already have the data of our face, so they can recognize our face everywhere already just through Facebook. That we don't even need to, but if we also give the data of our body, like with such a lightness, without being aware, they can recognize us even if we cover our face. Because you were mentioning that we need to cover our face, which is true. Nowadays, we need to cover our face in order to protect ourselves. But if they have the data of the body, how can we protect ourselves? And I was wondering if because you've been investigating specifically the field of ethics, if there is, if people are actually speaking of solutions, and if, because like I asked her, and do you question the ethics? And you are working for a university, and she said, no. As soon as there is no ethics issues, and I was like, what do you mean there is no ethics issues? It's gigantic issues. No, but as soon as they accept using the app, we are not responsible. Yeah, okay, you can use this all commercial, legal getaway, but that you may not be liable, but you do have a responsibility of informing the persons about the ethics and the consequences of giving their physical data.
I think there are huge implications, and it's a very big blind spot of the fashion industry sort of merging with the tech space. At the moment, the utility of fashion is merging with, like you said, big data and tech companies, and it's also merging with the health space. And so to underestimate the implication where data is stored and how it's stored is a huge blind spot. And I have come across interesting projects. I think the most notable one is probably by William Berners-Lee, who's the original creator of the World Wide Web. And he's working on an idea of data pods, where people essentially would own their data in these types of data pods. And this can even be a type of marketplace. And there are certain emerging services for kind of people being able to even sell their data. But essentially, if we think of even our data surviving our physical selves beyond our death, there are just huge implications that we are just in the infancy of dealing with this. And in the great arc of history, if you look at the last 20 years, even though AI has existed since longer, we just have not figured this out at all. And I think that if we look at a fashion industry that is trying to be so-called be more ethical when it comes to sustainability, there's and our impact on the planet, there's a huge responsibility to examine technologies, not just in where we store personal data, but even in their carbon footprint.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will move on to our next speaker. And are you ready, Paula?
I'm sorry, I thought it was the last. I was looking at a, yes, wait, I'm ready.
Well, I am. I have the list of what I was provided, but if you want to speak as the last.
No, it's fine. It's good that to speak after Geraldine.
Okay, excellent. So,
oops, wait, okay. Let me put it in the middle. Okay, perfect.
the multimedia artist, choreographer, designer, founder of Wearable Dynamics, an art company specialized in the production of interactive wearables that give superpowers, enhance physical awareness, and invite wearers to become performers. X be my skin, protect me, feel me, carve yourself from my experiences. And, we are looking forward to your presentation. So,
thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this very interesting conference and be able to share and listen to other people's research. Actually, it's so good to go after Geraldine because it saves me, I can just, all my work, it is indeed based on this, the problematic of the data, like who controls the data and how to give the control of the data to the wearer so that it is not used against him. And about also the how fashion, the big role of fashion in this process. Well, I'm Paola Tognazzi. I'm an artist and a physical interaction designer. My expertise is in body-informed wearable interactive systems with an accent of body-informed, so it's all about physical movement and interactive systems. Right now I'm doing, in 2008, I founded a company, Wearable Dynamics, in which I develop interactive wearables. And now I'm doing a PhD on interactive tapestry, in which I explore the field, the medium of tapestry to develop textiles that can interact with actuators and sensors, which is the big gap that there is in the field of fashion and in the field of wearables. The project is a temporary title, is RIXC, Be My Skin, Protect Me, Feel Me, and Carve Yourself from My Experiences. It actually refers to textiles that are able to dance. So by dancing, they can touch the body of the wearer to enhance their physical awareness. Is to amplify their ability to listen to themselves and to perceive reality. Textiles and garments already do that, already capture, because the purpose is like to capture the movement of the textile, to purposely reproduce it in a choreography of movements so that people that cannot move so that we can transfer those movements to people that cannot move, that are far away, that because of illness or circumstances, as we've very well witnessed the past 2 years, they are not able to move. Because movement allows the brain to trigger this chemical reaction of adrenaline and serotonin and dopamine that are essential for human survival. Like without movement, we die. And without those chemical reactions, we really are not able to interact with the world. So the question was like, how can we transfer those, how can we help people that cannot move to be mentally healthy? Because physically they cannot, but at least mentally healthy. And maybe textiles that can move and dance so they can feel it, it would be a solution. So the question is like, how to capture those movements to create this choreography, tactile choreography on the body. And the project emphasizes exactly the role of tactility, the role of the skin, and the role of interactivity to create memories and to amplify the listening ability of the body. And it's it really creates, I'm speaking of a system of researching, not individualized part, but really have researched the field from a systematic point of view, because they need to work and coordinate together in order for the system to work. And here I quote Anneke Smelik, that she says that to understand the complexity of new materialism in relation to technological innovation requires taking into account not merely the materiality of the fabric, but rather working from a dynamic notion of life in which humans, bodies, fabrics, objects, and technology are inextricably entangled. So why dancing textiles are so important? Here are examples that an attempt to transfer physical, tactile movements to people far away, to connect, really touch between people that are through distance, it has been happening, is of interest since already many years. Actually, Marco Triverio in 2006, around 2006, he made this beautiful app, the Fill Me app, that it works by that when you write a text and there another person far away, if it touches exactly where you are, where you're typing, it has an haptic reaction that it creates this sense of touch. And actually, this is super simple, but it is so brilliant because it is dynamic. It creates a narrative and it creates an interaction. Well, there's been an attempt to make something very similar, to translate it in a wearable with the Like a Hug Facebook jacket. No, it's a jacket. The MIT students made a jacket that if you press a like, it becomes a real hug. A virtual like becomes. But there are a lot of problems in the design, because there is it's very static. It's not a dynamic relation. It's a very static. Okay, it inflates and disinflates. But it homogenized bodies, it doesn't really touch specific body parts. It doesn't travel in space. The movement of the and this makes it like if they didn't manage to create the same interaction that it was happening in the Fill Me app application. While so the challenge is actually to create textiles that are able to tactily move in space, to map the whole body and touch individual parts, and to be dynamic. So the purpose of like this, like you see in the video, like the tactility travels in space, but also the pressure, the quality of the pressure changes. So you can recognize a person. In this sense, you can identify and you can have a personality and you can recognize who's hugging you from. So we need textiles that are able to connect sensors and actuators in a mutual informing process. And this will solve, if we can, like Geraldine already was mentioning, and in this morning, the 5 problems of wearables. Why wearables? Like there are millions of euros invested in wearables, and yet wearables haven't yet reached the market that are sold on, that can be used in a daily life. And the reason is why, because when we use electronics, we cannot wash it. The electronics are very fragile. If something breaks, you have to disregard the whole system and change it. Then there is the problem of homogenization of the body, that we need to calibrate and really take in consideration the idiosyncrasies of everybody, because everybody is completely different. There is a big issue of ecology, and then there is this gigantic issues of the ethics, as Geraldine was mentioning. So my research, well, not just mine, there is a field of research that claims that the solution is to actually bring back the focus on textiles and on mechanical textiles. And this will allow, like here I put a picture of Anouk Wiprek, which is an icon in the field of wearables, but the other day, yeah?
I'm sorry, can you make your presentation full screen?
Maybe it's better if I don't, so then I can skip to save time.
Okay, then maybe you can zoom tiny bit out so we can see your full presentation. Yes, yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
like Anouk Wiprek the other day in a conference, she was mentioning that she's actually, because of all those 5 problems, is not, the industry cannot be monetized and is at a point that is not monetizable. She's actually moving to the digital world. Instead of making wearables, she's going to do applications of artificial intelligence simulation of clothes. And that's kind of it is a problem. It is because we do need materiality and tactility. And the context of this research is that of interfaces as a source of pleasure. It moves beyond Schneiderman theory that when an interactive system is well designed, the interface disappears. With this sentence, he actually implies that interfaces cannot be a source of pleasure, and indeed interfaces since the very beginning has been a source of injuries and pain, and that humans are machines, and a machine interacting with a computer does not need an interface. Actually, it is true, humans are machines, but they are organic sensing machines. And therefore they need, not only they need interfaces to communicate with machines to not get injured, but they need interfaces to actually communicate with themselves. Because of humans' inability to detach their image of the self from actually their spatial and situational existence, it makes them machines that are very easily controllable and programmable. So Geraldine was saying, like, we need to cover our face to protect ourselves. I state that we need to actually feel our body in order to be able to protect ourselves. By moving the senses on a skin that touches us, it's possible to actually reawaken physical perception, but also the responsibility that we have when we are interacting with a machine, but also when we are interacting with the world. The field that that since the very beginning has focused on these very important issues of consciousness and responsibility is the field of interactive art. Here I'm going to use 2 examples that represent why the third a reflection on why the third wave of wearables is focusing on dancing, meaning performance, not static, not casual movement, but literally the performance of movement. Because when you perform, it comes out your identity and your personality, and why the focus moves from sensuality to actually the erotics of movement control systems. Like narratives inform the tools choices. Here there are 2 different pieces. One is using robotics, and I was using an interactive system. And this I put in relation, there is no right and wrong. It actually is to demonstrate that there is this longing that humans, we need them both. That we have the longing for the stable, for the security that gives the stable, but we also need the unstable medium, which is electronics, to keep our attention alive and to keep our engagement alive. The interactive system that I used was Wearable Supernow. Is an interactive system that movement capture sensors embedded in bracelets that give the superpower to control the music and the sound with the energy of your movements. If you move slow, the sound goes very slow, and if you move fast, the sound goes fast. And the reason why I developed it was to capture the intention of movement, to show that we are always moving, even when we are not aware of, and to allow the persons to have their body speak and to actually capture the future. Because when you see the intention of movement, you can actually be in the now and react to what is happening. you have the control to adapt to the system. And during the performance, what I did during the performance, I interviewed the audience and about with some basic questions, and their answer went into the system, and then they, with their answers, it created the landscape, the soundtrack of the performance. And here, sorry, it's in Spanish, I'm going to translate it, but this is the key of the narrative. It says, hello, I'm your body, listen to me, know me, speak with me. It's the body asking you to listen to them. In Why Do We Have Organs in Pairs and Only One Heart, I instruct the audience to follow me. I dance and they copy my movements. But as some are wearing the sensors, the sound that they produce guide me in my rhythms and movement choices, in the same way that they can decide how to adapt my movements to their own bodies. It creates a mutually informing process in which we keep adapting and transforming, listening to each other's. While in Inferno, the artist asks the audience to wear a robotic exoskeleton, which is programmed to perform a fixed sequence of movements. The wearable moves the body of the audience, but it cannot adapt to their individual characteristics. It homogenizes them. They can get injured. Although it is erotic, not having to make the decisions and not knowing what's coming next, for many can be very liberating and exciting. But they put a condition. They need the imagery of the robotic machine to be impactful, and they want to feel inferior so they can focus all their senses to listen and react. The differences. Why do we have organ in pairs and only one heart? Participants move the interactive wearable. They have control over their bodies and they can travel through the wall space. While in Inferno, participants are moved by the exoskeletons. They have no control over the dance performance. DEMITERE, he used robotics because he wanted to show the nature of control is either voluntary or coerced, while I use an interactive systems to show that the nature of control is either aware or unaware. And both systems play with the robotics and movement control systems, and both, depending on the needs and the taste, they can be experienced as hells or heavens. It really, because not everybody wants to have the freedom of control. So a lot of people actually need to, like in Inferno, they need to subject in order to actually be able to focus their attention, because only by focusing all your senses you can perceive. And while in Tammy, there was the interactive systems, it really shows that the responsibility of listening, continuously listening to yourself and also to the other persons, it is of the wearer. But the main reason why I chose those two pieces is because they show what artificial intelligence and neurosciences concluded. The reason of brains is to control movement, and the reason of dance is to make us humans. Daniel Wolpert, the neuroscientist, in 2011, he was giving a conference in which he says that the brain is it has not evolved to think, but actually to control movement. And to understand movement, it is to understand the whole brain. Therefore, when studying memory, cognition, and sensory processing, it is important to remember that those are there for the reason, and the reason is actually action. Another factor is that memory, we are machines, and like any other machine, our brain has a very limited memory space. So what happens is that when we don't move, when we stop doing some particular actions, the maps between the brain and the body gets deleted. There is a science of proprioceptions that has developed to actually enhance and to keep those maps alive. But it is dance. Dance is the technique to keep all the different coordinations alive. And the philosopher Lyotard did this beautiful quote that we need machines that suffer from the burden of their memories, implies that memory is what differentiates us from machines. The more we remember, the more human we become. And by enhancing the memory of the body, dance is the discipline that transforms us from robots into humans. And there is also, in my piece, actually, I use a less intellectual quote, but in the movie, in the TV show Terminator, there was this moment in which the bodyguard was taking classes of ballet because she wanted to learn to be human in order to understand humanity. Now, the challenge of the third wave of wearables is actually to combine them, because it's not one is right and one is wrong. We need both. We need the instability and we need the stability for survival. My dream is to integrate them together in one interactive wireless dancing textile that can feel, touch, and move our bodies. In 2014, I developed The Dragon is Alive, a reactive 3D printed skin that transforms, accommodating the wearer's movements. Now, with the PhD Be My Skin, I'm investigating the integration of soft robotics and nanotechnology with ancestral tapestry techniques to create woven textiles that can perform tactile choreographies on our skins. My dream is to integrate them together. So, to produce shape-shifting textiles, the key is focusing on adaptive mechanical textiles that can guide, as I was saying at the beginning, that are able to guide the direction and the energy of the actuators, so they can touch the body. When I developed The Dragon is Alive, I was designing from the world system. I designed the adaptive mechanics, but then I had to actually map the body and to find the connections so that the arm is not a 1-0-1 reaction. It really has shades. According to the different movement of the arm, the shape changes, and it changes the way it moves and the way it grips the body. So my methodology is research to design process, and I use dance and the human body mechanical system as a references to patterns. The reason why I choose dance is because not only dance is a discipline that shows that the different directions and the different energies affect the behavior and the shapes and the movement quality, but also through dance you can understand how they feel on the body. For example, ballet is a technique in which the direction goes outside to keep balance, but it awakens the lymphatic system. So when you do ballet, after you feel incredibly energized. While Buto is contemporary Japanese dance, the movement is the opposite. Instead of going outside, it's all going inwards. It's about moving every little individual muscle that we have in the body, which is incredibly textural. And it is what we want to achieve with textiles, to have textiles that can have all this incredibly potential, like ability to move in all the directions. But when you do Buto, it's interesting because after you are exhausted, because the brain, like our brain is limited. So to control all those movements kind of makes it a bit crash. And that's why we actually really need textiles to delegate those onto textiles to do this, so that we can have the space to absorb and the information to manage. And the other methodology is I use software. I create software to develop and design textile patterns. Like, for example, this is I took the variables of dance to create this skeleton in which I can control the directions and the intensity, and I also can capture the data. So I can save the data to then send it to them for accurate or for precision. And then, for example, this is an example of what I mean by shape-shifting textiles. There are no electronics, just with the quality of the yarn that contracts and expands according to the temperature and the direction of the pattern. They managed to make these textiles that when it gets cold, it inflates, capturing the air, and it is used for insulation purposes. and there are no electronics. Like here is another example of NASA. The NASA is investigating the use of alloys, memory alloys, to make clothes for when you are in the space. But as you will see, the alloy also is a temperature reactive material that changes shape. Well, it doesn't really change shapes. It contracts and expands with the temperature. But without the textile guiding the direction, the material cannot do anything. It is the pattern of the textile, the one that allow the combination to become applicable. And thanks to tapestry is this ancestral technique where you can handcraft every little detail. And it is the perfect platform to actually explore how to integrate technology with textiles. So to finish, like interaction creates memories, materials capture, material are able to store the memories, and interactive materials will be able to store and transfer physical memories from a body to another.
Thank you. Thank you for your research. It's very, very extensive, and I think what you're doing this looks not only it has value in helping people. It also is very interesting to look at as a design. It's fascinating. Thank you. Do we have a quick question from the audience?
Jonas has a question.
Yeah, I would have a question. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's been very enlightening for me, because I was thinking about, are those wearables serving some purpose on their own, or so do they offer an extension to the user's reality, or are they actually creating a whole new quasi-autonomous layer of reality on which they are basically well, kind of inhabiting? Is it?
No, my work, like the work I show, they're all applications, so that they act. So they're not in the stage of theory. They actually, that's why I choose. Yeah, as much like I'm really, I know the problem, so I'm working towards solutions. So I took examples of wearables that already tackled and found solutions, and that's why they produce applications. They're not in a stage of posing a question, but of answering to a problem.
Yeah, I see this, but I mean, like, how can I say this? I felt kind of reminded of Stellar's Ping Body. You know this? It's very old 80s media art.
No, I know Stellar personally. Tell me, which one do you mean?
Ping Body. The where he's wearing something and people could control his movements from far away by just like pinging his certain limbs. So basically
Yeah, I know. Actually, Stellar, it fits the erotics, like the erotics context in Inferno. That is a more this kind of which I didn't want to mention, but it's a bit dominant submission relation that allows to focus. In this case, he wanted to be manipulated so that he can focus and react in the same way that the audience wearing the exoskeletons are being manipulated. As soon as they enter, they lose all control. They are manipulated by the machine. The machine is pre-programmed. And the purpose is actually they do function because you really need to focus all your senses in order not to get killed. Honestly, I mean, let's be honest. That's the end of it. But that's the thing. We need to focus also in order to regain control of our body in order if we want to survive. And those past 2 years really demonstrate that we are kind of been going a bit backwards instead of going forward. And now survival, physical and mental survival is on the top of, like, is on the basic of the pyramid of Maslow. And so that's the purpose. That's the application, to train skills, coaching skills to make us.
Okay, so the wearables should make us aware of our own body, of our own bodily existence.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
because I'm sorry, like I have your same problem. I have too many things to say. So at the beginning, I mentioned that when I was speaking about plasma, that because the digitalization of the world has made us completely lose total perception of who we are. We are unable, the selfie generation, etc., etc. We are completely unable to detach the image of the self from actually the spatial and current circumstance of the. We are not able to recognize when we are angry because something happened, or when we are angry just because we are hungry. Like, we are really unable. No, it's true. And technology and the industry is kind of taking a bit advantage of this, because a simple example is the phone. Like, the new phones are very heavy, and the weight of the phone, it's now because there is this addiction of of being on the social network 24/7, and that's why they need batteries that last for days instead of batteries that last for 8 hours, and then you can recharge. But those batteries are heavy. The problem is like that there is a very limited amount of weight that we can carry without getting injured. And those new phones produce incredibly gigantic, big injuries on the back, on the neck, and they're literally changing even the shape of our column. But our body is not designed to change shape. It's already a very fragile mechanism that, it's not really designed to have these radical changes. But they can do that. I mean, the fact that I complain immediately because I bought a new phone, and after 2 weeks I was in pain. My body is incredibly reactive. So and I'm old, so I get aware of this. I had to go back into the vintage market to find a phone that still could have enough memory for me to update the application, but it didn't have such a heavy battery. But everybody's getting injured. Nobody noticed.
I think we should move next questions and discussions to the chat room. Please, you can continue there privately or chat with everyone. I think people might be interested to read. Paula, maybe you can type in your website address in the chat so people can find you. Then we will move on without delays to our next speaker. So, Pavel, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Yes, so Estonian artist, critic, and new media researcher Pavel Kelemees has studied psychology, art history, design, and is a widely published author who is very active in writings and teachings and conferences. And today we will be listening to a presentation called Cooperative Aesthetics and Embodied Multi-User Interaction.
Sorry, how much time I have? Tell me, please.
You have 20 minutes that also include questions, but this panel is kind of horribly ignoring that 20 minutes cut off. So keep it short, but also keep to the point, but please.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen, then we can so hopefully you see
Yes.
My slides and title and the first page. I would say it's kind of a historical overview of several projects, and the question what I would like to ask, where we are now in connection with cooperative artworks, and especially cooperative interactive artworks. I would say that this kind of artworks are some sort of segments in the history of interactive art, and I am motivated because of several reasons. Naturally, because technology evolves and changes, and the more and more possibilities are for interactors to participate in the artwork together with others. And it is very important criteria of this kind of artworks that two or more participants or interactors could at the same time be part of the artwork or work together with the artwork. And it's important that the artwork is not meant for one user, and artwork's cooperative features are conceptually embedded into artwork. And naturally, as we are encountering new technological sensors which are embedded into artworks, which are sensing over the distance or sensing biological information of the users, then we are also, or users or interactors are completely in new situation participating in such artworks. And I would like to present you a kind of short overview in art history where we already are encountering this kind of cooperative or collaborative participation, where it's important that artworks are not meant for a single user interaction or participation. So already we can go back to the 60s, and a lot of participation-based artworks were done there, and we know all these forms of art like happening or performance which were established more or less in the 50s and 60s. And one project actually which was initiated by group Graph in Paris, where in different locations of the Paris people were engaged in collaborative actions. No, naturally, in essence, you can say that this work could be experienced by single person as well. But I think this group dynamic by these works is very important. That people are together, are doing very weird things in the center of the city. Radosh Chinchera Kinoautomat from the 67, where changes in whole performance were happening as people were collaboratively making choices. A very classical example from interactive cinema. Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinovich satellite art project and satellite kind of performances, what they did between different places where people's shapes or images were put together on the one screen. It was also essentially the projects between two places, as well as Hole in Space in 1980, where people were between New York and San Francisco, talking to each other via audio and via video screen. Also very classical example of telecommunication art. Paul Sermon's various projects and Telematic Vision 93, where the communication with bodies, basically people were behaving in two different locations, as trying to put their images on the same screen. And their behavior was also very influenced by the visuals, where they saw each other kind of superimposed on the same screen. Project with the title Bump where which was also a telecommunication project. People were walking on the bridge, and the people in another city were walking on the kind of another side of the bridge. Basically, you saw as this bridge was changing because movement of the people in the other location, and basically physically we're kind of interacting with them all the time. Quite famous work by Ulrike Gabriel, where people were wearing EEG devices and influencing light and movement of small robots on this scene. Also sort of kind of dialogue via EEG signals. Maurice Benayon, Jean-Baptiste Barrière, world skin, also famous installation in Kyiv, where one person was a sort of bus driver who was leading people through this landscape, and other persons were able to make pictures, and with those pictures kind of cutting the surface from the visuals on the image. Chris Sommer, Loren Minano, Mobile Feelings, essentially dialogical project where people were feeling each other heartbeat, or even breathing was kind of presented through the ventilators to each other, and many other elements of sensors were involved in those peculiar mobile devices. Cause and Effect show by Chris Hayes and Teo Pelinen. I have here the images from 2004, but probably they started this project earlier. Also sort of interactive cinema example, which naturally cannot exist, cannot function without collaborative participation of audience. And different films naturally and audience, different kind of inputs were in the real time part of these performances. Sonia Zilari, if you are close to me, interactive performance, bioelectromagnetic responsive environment, where in the center of the performance was kind of, let's say, main performer, and the users or interactors were moving this main performer and changing animations on the walls. Lisa Jeverbrat, Anne-Marie Hansen, and Dan Overholt, Pulse. I don't have images, and actually this work was presented in the darkness. People's heartbeats were amplified into hearable sounds, and their task was to kind of adjust their heartbeats into the single rhythm. Raffaello Zonheimer's people were playing with each other via shadows which were cast to the wall. Again, Lozano Hammer Pulse Room, where the participants' pulse was recorded and showed in the blinking of the lamp on the ceiling, and each lamp was one person, and so basically whole room was filled with the heart rhythms of various or different people. Vicious circular breathing by the same author. Very dangerous work, I would say, because people were entering this glass room and breathing the same air which was used already by other participants before. So you became willingly or not part of the same kind of breathing space. And there were other natural elements in that installation, but I am just emphasizing this this kind of same breeding environment, which was important here. Zoom Pavilion with the same author, Lozano Hammer. Again, people's faces were in real time recorded, and their movement was surveilled by a specific recording system. Karl Lanza and Herman Maat's EEG presented in Riga as well a few years ago. Their EEG rhythms were recorded and presented in real time around them. So again, naturally, this work cannot exist only with a single user, because at least 2 people are needed for kissing. A day without a mobile phone by Estonian artists Riin Rõõs and Eve Arpo. People's mobile phones were gathered and hanged to the tree. These performances were made in several cities, in Tallinn, Sao Paulo, Edmonton, Dortmund, and the people could call to those phones. And basically, it was like a telecommunication installation as well. Erik Alaloga, Kinematic Mystery. The people were closed in the big hangar where they had a task to find a way how to escape this hangar, but there was a scheme on the wall, and their task was to find out the methods or kind of solution, and find a key and to open the door and escape this hangar. So it was, in a way, quite interesting, but rather performance-based artwork. Estonian artist Reimo Tangso and his Democracy, where installation worked only if 2 or more people were kind of holding some specific kind of handles on the wall. Juhan Soomet's Artist's Room. Again, people were closing circuits and making the different sound environments in the space together, or even alone, but I would say that collaboratively it was much more fun. And one of my work also where this collaborative or cooperative action was essential, that people were closing circuits and then videos on the wall started to work. And it was not meant for single user, because the single user was not able to reach those handlers on the wall. And the title Cooperative Aesthetics, what I used, well, I was inspired by this Gerhard Funk's project in Linz, at Linz University of Arts, and in Arts Electronica Deep Space event this year, today, I mean, this contemporary year, those projects were shown. And this installation works because there is a technology which is able to register people's position in real time in that space. And I think it was very kind of interesting and very fun to see how people were behaving, being in real time detected by the system. And here I have videos. Hopefully you see, you can see them.
So, okay. Yeah, next kick. So now it works. Yeah, perfect, perfect. So, it's self-explaining. You generate this 3D object. Then, for example, we rotate.
Okay, and there were very several projects, but basically it was kind of hardware environment on which you can build very different kind of visuals. And I think I haven't seen anywhere else such work. And now I would like to finish my presentation. I try to show this kind of trend of collaborative artworks in history of interactive art, where which are meant for multiple users, not for one user. And this cooperativeness is embedded into the concept of the artwork. And we saw examples where participants were sharing willingly and not physical, chemical, or biological environment where they were. And maybe I had just very few examples where biosensorial information was used as input for artworks, but basically I'm sure that here we are encountering quite interesting phenomena, which is not yet kind of completely finished. Okay, thank you for your attention. I'm finishing.
Thank you. And I wanted to remind you or tell you, if you didn't know, Rival has provided the list of the artworks that he mentioned, and you can find them in the conference website. I think I will definitely go there to look up some of them. And what is your interest in these artworks? Why do you think? Why are you interested in exploring these multi-people performances and experiences?
First of all, as I said, the work doesn't work with a single user. Naturally, you can use it somehow, but it's important that this kind of collaborativeness and that two or more participants are kind of adjusting each other behavior. I think in the context of it's not completely new in the context of interactive art, but in art in general, it's or in participatory art, it's not relatively rare. It's not always so that you should kind of be towards the other participants, and you are not kind of alone. And especially with the work, with my own work, what I showed here finally. It was also interesting to follow this group dynamic in the exhibition space, where if there is a single user or single viewer, then he's not able to see that work physically. He's not able to reach those kind of sensors or handlers on the wall to make this artwork working. And what's happening then is he or she is waiting for another participant or asking the guard of the exhibition room to help him or her to kind of switch on this artwork, because otherwise the work doesn't work. So I think it's kind of segments in the context of interactive art, and it's I haven't encountered any article or which is specifically dedicated to this kind of segment of in art history, and naturally my motivation is to write something about that.
And thank you. And it's very interesting. I think it's what you were presenting, this kind of overview of selected works, because most of them are not new. So
sure,
it's very nice to see that what we see in galleries and artworks today is as a VR and as a super high tech and some kind of like a mystified technology, it also has a real art history and where the ideas come from and experiments come from. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And we can go to our next presenter. Maria, are you here? Yes.
Yes, thank you.
So, a researcher, web designer, architect. Her work in designing interactive objects and spaces has been awarded and published in international conferences. And today we will be listening to Making Room for the Body, a multisensory sketching tool for architectural design.
So hello everyone, thank you for being here. So I'm gonna need a minute to share my screen, and while I do that, I'm gonna ask you to maybe grab some headphones if you have some available. The presentation is best listened to with headphones, but in case you don't have any, don't worry about it, it's not gonna be a problem. So I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully now you can see a full screen presentation. So today's presentation is based on the prototype of the SoundMat, a multisensory sketching tool for architects. The SoundMat was my thesis project at Malmö University's master's program in interaction design. But first things first, why would architects need such a tool in the first place? Well, while we experience the buildings we live in with all senses, architecture is produced under consideration of only one side. So according to Bernard Tchoumi, architects draft their plans with visual means and from God's eye view, as if they were standing on top of a pyramid. However, the lived experience of space is always embodied and always situated. We experience space with all senses, and we can see only what's right in front of us, as if we were in a labyrinth. So if we observe this paradox from the perspective of embodied interaction design, we can raise the following question. How can embodied interaction methods provide alternatives that expand the visual-based process of architectural ideation? So in order to answer this question, I employed several design methods that were grounded upon three main areas of theory: embodied interaction design theory, phenomenology, and a contemporary view of the self as a united whole of mind and body. So more specifically, Paul Durisch argues that HCI is heavily influenced by the Cartesian separation of mind and body and often favors the mind. He also believes that in order to overcome this, the designer needs to situate themselves in the real world of lived experience and see the world through their user's eyes. Christina Hook takes this argument a step further, stating that situating yourself in the right context is in itself not enough. Designers also need to include the living, feeling, moving, breathing body in their design process. She argues that designers should craft experiences that are pleasing to all senses and not just sight. So in order to situate myself in the world of lived experience, I conducted extensive fieldwork with practicing architects. In total, 91 architects participated in my user studies, which consisted of interviews, an online questionnaire with aleatoric elements, and cultural probes. So the interviews confirmed that the participants only sketched with the visual means. They said that it's ranging from hard to impossible to design for other senses, and that they would like to overcome these limitations, but do not know how. The questionnaire revealed that people would like to be able to work with touch, hearing, kinesthesia, temperature, and smell, with a tool that they could use both on-site and at the workplace. And they were worried that they would not be able to communicate their designs with colleagues, clients, and other and contractors. For the probes, the participants engaged with multi-sensory experience space in 3 creative tasks. The probes were a design experiment for examining how much information certain senses can convey about space. The sense that people thought had the most potential was hearing. They also said that the task related to sound was the one that they were most likely to use for inspiration during their daily work. And this, I'm sorry, I mixed up my, okay. So moving on, I synthesized all the information for user research and started sketching. This is where Christina Hook comes in. Since this whole project is about creating an embodied tool, I did not really sketch with pen and paper. I only sketched with embodied methods such as body storming and full body sketching. And most importantly, when I sketched, sensory input processing was key to my decision making. So as you can see, I sketched several different ideas before I came up with the very first version of the sound mat, which is the video on the top left part of the screen. And moving on, I redesigned this sketch to be a carefully designed prototype so that I could test it with users. So what is the sound mat? It's the mock-up of a floor mat in the shape of a corridor with pressure sensors. You can use it to sketch sonic and kinesthetic experiences in a corridor. You launch the app, pick some sounds, and then step on the mat to get a first-person experience of what you designed. I specifically chose the case study of a corridor because it's an in-between space and it could be anywhere. This means I wouldn't be limited to designing a tool for one specific type of soundscape. So based on sensory input processing, I chose wireless headphones instead of speakers, because when you wear headphones, the sound follows you, then the experience is more realistic. And also it's easy to carry them on site. This is the prototype of the app that I tested with users. When they first launch the app, the user gets introduced to its features through an onboarding process. Then they get to create a new soundscape, but first they have to do a prep task to get familiar with embodied design practice. It's basically a sound awareness exercise. And when they are done with the task, they can pick sounds from a library or record their own and then place them on the mat. This basically programs the sound mat. So now I'm going to show you a video of the prototype that I tested with users. You can wear your headphones now. I'm going to share the screen again to enable sound. So this video is, the sound in this video is not a product of post-production. It is a recording of exactly what I was hearing when I was using the prototype. So after the user uses the sound mat, they can go back to the app and make adjustments if they feel like they're not satisfied with the results. So the sketches that an architect may create using the sound mat may inform their design process. For example, the sound of wind chimes may result in placing a window in a particular spot, or the sound of faint conversation may lead to opening up a door to the living room. So moving on, I tested the prototype with practicing architects. The feedback I got was really, really valuable. For example, one tester pointed out that it would be great if 2 or more people could use the sound mat at the same time in case there are multiple designers, or a designer and a client or another colleague. Plus, the sound mat could come in modules so that you could arrange it in different layouts in case you want to design a space that's not a corridor, for example. So if the project were to continue, all of these observations will be taken into consideration. And now I'm going to attempt to critically evaluate this sketching tool, discussing both the risks and the potential that might arise from its use. So let's start with risks. First of all, people who are severely sight impaired or people with severe hearing loss might not be able to either use the prototype or benefit from the prototype. Moreover, every person experiences and perceives the world in a different way, depending on many factors, such as class, race, and gender. And if future users are not aware of this, then situatedness may be absent from the design process. And lastly, using sounds from a specific sound library may standardize the process of sonic sketching. That means that certain sonic aesthetics and stereotypes might be promoted when using the sound mat. The sound mat also holds a lot of potential. Firstly, the prototype may benefit practicing architects, the project's end users, as it expands their current repertoire of sketching tools and methods. The same goes for other space makers like artists, interaction designers, scenographers, interior designers, and others. It may also benefit the people who live in buildings designed with this tool, because sound and kinesthesia are often neglected in the architectural design process, even though they are both essential to the experience of space. So this project may also contribute to the field of interaction design, as existing methodologies do not always focus on the embodied nature of lived experience. And lastly, this project will hopefully trigger discussions between architects, artists, and interaction designers, creating awareness of the ways in which the 3 fields may advance from mutual effort, communication, and partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you presented your risks, and you mentioned that like a downside of it, of the prototype, is the standardization. I wanted to tell you that's not a downside. That just means you can really sell it, because more people can use it, more money you can make. So really go for it. Your prototype is excellent, and we are neglecting the soundscapes that we are experiencing in our lives. So as an artist, as an architect, it's an excellent product that you have invented.
Thank you, Maija. You're very kind.
Do we have a question from the audience?
Someone asked me to post a link on chat. I'm going to do that right now.
Good. I have a question. Can you also imagine using your tool to kind of raise the awareness of sound pollution?
I've never thought about this before, but that does sound quite interesting, actually. And that is also a really cool subject because we are not always aware of silence and sound pollution, especially like in our daily lives when we're commuting. We usually wear headphones, listen to music, and we try to mute the outside world. But that is actually one exercise that I made my testers do before they came to test the prototype. I had them, while they commuted to the university, I had them really be aware of the sound around them and really be aware of all the layers, the potential silences, the potential like overwhelming sounds. So yes.
Thank you. And so we can now move on to our last presenter in this session. And if you are ready, then I can introduce you.
Is it me?
Yes, that's you. Okay.
Hello.
Is it Leo or Leonardo?
Leo is fine.
Okay. Leo Scarin is a new media artist and designer from Italy, now based in the Netherlands. In his artistic practice, Leo investigates the bridge between new technologies and the human senses by creating spaces for more intimate and conscious digital interactions. And today we will be listening to a presentation, Remote Embodiments, Collaborative Photogrammetry Making as a Bridge for Distant Bodies. Thank you. You can start.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen, which is actually my virtual camera. So this works. And there I am. Can you see?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so as you introduced, my name is Leo Scarin. I'm a new media artist from Italy, based in The Hague, the Netherlands, where I freshly graduated from the interactive media design bachelor at the Royal Academy of Arts. So I work with interactive media, and I'm very passionate about new technologies, and especially the way we use them to create experiences of embodiment. So this is what I'm going to talk about for these 15 minutes, along with my own perspective on the concept of virtual sensing. And I'm going to do this by showing two works of mine, Variations on a Remote Room and Fragments. And they both deal with the concept of remote embodiment and virtual sensing. And I will also talk about the process of making them and the research that formed the practice, which is also collected in my thesis, below the title. In my thesis, I talk about the concept of loss in digital interactions, both from the human perspective, so loss of experiential data, sensorial data, and machine perspective, so loss of computer data. And yeah, let's start. So remote embodiments, collaborative photogrammetry as a bridge for distant bodies. So this is already an oxymoron, that the embodiment relates to the body, and remote is what is beyond the body range. So what I mean is the digital embodiment. For me, that's the translation of material human interactions expressed or taking form through virtual body. And when you think of virtual body, of course, you think of the avatars, but there are many other ways that we designers and engineers have programmed the translation of the virtual body, of the material body, into a virtual realm through controllers, for example, the mouse pointer, the joystick, and then more sophisticated technologies to really bridge the the body to the medium. And yeah, nowadays we can think of the Google Street View, this virtual camera with 6 degrees of freedom, and this 360 view was literally a simulation of the physical body in a virtual environment where we gaze at the streets. And in the internet, in the cyberspace, where we all have virtual bodies, and often our digital interactions are designed to be simulations of real interactions. And when we design simulations of our world in the virtual world, then we encounter some issues. So this was the premise to my research, and I classified 3 of these issues. The first is the issue of thermodynamics, the phenomenon in which entropy must increase over time. So I'm not going to explain the details, but in this physical phenomenon, we can observe time and the direction of time. And also it's a law that includes the time as a variable for the first time. And in a virtual environment where we're freed from physical laws and we don't have the thermodynamics, time is, of course, experienced differently. In our universe, time is a continuous flow, whilst in a computer, time is a sequence of steps. Time can be frozen in the digital world, while of course it cannot in the physical. So there's already this first experiential gap between the physical world and virtual world in terms of time dimension. And the second issue of iridescence, which is the visual phenomenon of a surface changing color based on its viewing geometry. So it's a really interesting phenomenon that exists because it exists only insofar as it is seen. So it also touches upon the relationship between apparent and real. So when the apparent is real and the real is subjective. And there's a beautiful article by Tavi Marad about the problem of iridescence and how it relates to the problem of the screen, the digital screen, which etymologically, the screen is a word for very physical protection, a spatial limitation imposed by a bodily occupation. In basketball, for example, the screen is when you literally block the player from getting into the playing area. And I'm going to finish this, but I will introduce the third issue, the issue of intimacy. Intimacy, Tavi Marad also says that intimacy organizes our experience of space and especially of surfaces. And if we think of the screen, the digital screen as a surface, then in a digital interaction, the screen stops being a concrete encounter, an intimate encounter, but the site for an apparent encounter. So basically, the issue of intimacy describes how we lose intimacy within contactless digital interactions, although we gain an apparent sense of presence and proximity with the other. For example, now we're having this conversation on Zoom and our bodies are converted into these rectangular blocks, and I can't smell you and you cannot touch my face and I cannot look at your body language, but we are bridging our distances and we can have a conversation. And you know, I can even augment myself and move my face around like this. So then my research question was, how can I recover or reconceptualize intimacy in a digital interaction? And in my artistic practice, how can I combine these 3 issues, the thermodynamics, iridescence, and intimacy? And how can new technologies, because I love new technologies, how can they serve me in doing that? So I started exploring materials to work with, and I discovered photogrammetry, which is a technique, but it's also the perfect material for me to work with because it's hybrid. So it takes physical inputs and processes them digitally into a 3D scan, a 3D model, and then it can be modeled, it can be, I can retouch it, I can literally like as if it was a physical material. And I was talking to this about many of my friends that don't live in the Netherlands where I'm based, but live in either Italy or UK or France, and And then I asked myself, how can I bridge this distance between me and my friends with this project, with this material? Can I make this a collaborative project, or is this a collaborative material? Of course it is, because the physical room, of course, you cannot move it, but a digital representation of it is reproducible and movable into a cyberspace. So I created an instruction video for my friends to instruct them on how to make the photo documentation of the room, so that I can collect the photos and process them and create a 3D scan. And then I collected, I gathered a lot of 3D scans from my friends' rooms, and I placed them into a VR environment. And then the result was quite cool. This is my brother's room from Italy, and this also used to be my room when I was living in Italy. And to me, to enter that room in VR felt really presential, something that really affected me, quite an intimate presence. And then the question that came after was how
most of my work, which I've worked on in meticulous calibrations of each word. Do you have a question?
Sorry, who's that?
I'm sorry, I think someone was just not muted.
Oh, okay. So I was saying that then I wanted to create something that could share this sense of presence with an external viewer. So I developed a system of digital touch, and where this material, this photogrammetry material, can be touched and moved around in the form of particles by the viewer. And to augment the tactility sense, I installed this piece in a physical room. I'll show you how to put in here. So this was the exhibition of the piece in a physical room with physical objects, these domestic objects. So what I did, I made a 3D scan of this room and placed the 3D scan into a virtual environment, and then I mapped the physical objects to the virtual. And so then when the viewer enters this VR environment, what they see is the same room in a photogrammetry form, in this grain-like form. And it's also a sort of layer of introduction to the aesthetics and to the experience, because they can already touch around and move these particles around. And the objects function as portals to all of these different rooms from friends of mine that are distant, and that we collaborated on this remote photogrammetry technique. And so the touch here, when they touch this object and they don't see the object, but they see the digital form of it, that triggers an awareness of the tactility. And then when they enter these rooms through the portals, they sort of create for themselves this context of very isolated space, very private, where they assist to this, well, so basically in these rooms, there is the 3D scan, and there are also the soundscapes collected from the rooms, and musical compositions that I created from the soundscapes, and conversations that I have with my friends about their experience inhabiting these places during the lockdown. And then on top of that, I play also with the visual effects of the particles. Let's see if I can find an example here. Yeah, so for example, at some point in the narrative, they twirl around, or they just fall down, and that creates a sense of vertigo, sort of, or floating up, or disorientation in the body of the viewer. So it's a very bodily response. And yeah, so this was variations on a remote room, and then I developed this work further at the V2 lab for unstable media in Rotterdam, and I decided to create a work that was less about the interaction between body and architecture, but more about body to body. So I created a, there we go, a VR installations for 2 people. And it only works if there are 2 people, so Rival's gonna like this, because it is about the interaction between them. So this time they wear the VR and the only thing they see is a live photogrammetry of the other. They stand on these platforms that are vibrating. There are these vibrators, vibrating machines on the platforms, and they hear also sound on the speakers. And all of these outputs are affected by their position in space and by the distance between each other. So they wear the VR and they can touch each other, they can interact with each other, and their body distance affects the vibration of the platform, and the position of their hands related to the other's position of the hands goes to affect the sound stream. I think you can hear this. So then I'll go back to the presentation here. Yes. So to conclude, what I found out with this experimentation is that intimacy within a virtual body is a very complex feeling to translate. But what we can do is we can reconceptualize it, renew it, and approach the problem of simulation differently. So not repeating physical phenomenon, but renewing them and adapting them to the virtual world, which has different laws. So for the virtual embodiment to really be an augmentation of the body, an extension of the body, instead of an escape, which is many times the case when we talk about virtual simulation. So that was it. So if you have any questions, or otherwise you can follow up our website or contact where we can share more of this conversation.
Thank you for your presentation. I think it looked quite great. It looked amazing. And I have a question. Is it still photogrammetry? How is it still photogrammetry?
The latest work, you mean?
Yeah.
It's a 3D scan. Yeah, it's a bit blurred, the line between what is photogrammetry and what is 3D scan. Here, this is a live 3D scan taken from volumetric cameras. Yeah, so maybe the term was correct.
No, it's fine. I just got confused, like, oh wow, I need to discover this photogrammetry too, but it's not actually photogrammetry. But I see a hand raised from Paula, so if you have a question.
Hi, Leonardo. Thanks
Hi,
for the presentation. I was wondering, because you started the presentation speaking about the measuring of time, and how in this installation is used measuring of time.
So the question about time started the whole research about how we experienced the dimension of time, but also the dimension of space and the dimension of movement in the virtual world. And it's not directly there, of course, but this idea of thermodynamics, this idea of the entropic, chaotic direction of time, then that I tried to apply it in the first work, the variations of a remote room, where, but also in the second, in the interaction of touch, when the touch changes irreversibly the shape of these particles, and also, of course, the two works are really different because the first one is narrative, so you wear the VR and you can select like which room to enter, but then every room has a time-based narrative, and it's 1 minute, and then you go back to the main room. So it's very time-based, and that's the user cannot escape from. And the second one is it's non-linear, so you can just wear it and play with the others, of course, and it's more of a timeless experience. Yeah. So I was trying to experiment also like different experiences of time in the virtual reality, although it's not so direct as maybe you expected.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I really wanted to also highlight where you talk about intimacy while standing next to each other while wearing VR glasses. So instead of actually hugging each other, you are hugging each other while standing next to each other virtually. So good job. Excellent.
Something that actually happened, and I had a lot of different interactions from people wearing this VR, and the most interesting one was when strangers would try it, because maybe there was a visitor that was on his own and another visitor that was on their own, and then they enter this VR space and they start touching each other because it's a safe space. They can do that, right? And other times it happened that they weren't daring touching each other, so it felt really intimate to them, to the point that they had to block this interaction. So yeah, although they are of course very close to each other, and that's because of cable limitation and all the technical issues, of course, but it does create a new interaction that you cannot have in the physical world.
And maybe you can look into some more practical use of the technology, maybe for people with disabilities and also people who are on the spectrum.
Yes.
Something to think about. We are now on our lunch break, and I see in the program that we should be back at 4 o'clock to continue our parallel sessions. Is there I don't think anyone else wants to say anything, so please have a good lunch, and I'll see you all later.